The night Grant slapped me across the face, something ancient and dangerous finally woke up. I tasted blood and fear, but also a strange clarity I had never felt before. For 24 years, I had swallowed every insult, every demand, every lie they wrapped in the word family. I learned to stay quiet, to stay useful, to stay small. But that night, as the room fell silent, I realized the truth they never wanted me to know. I was not the broken one. I was the buried one. And when Connor calmly placed the marriage certificate on the table, their faces drained of color. A single paper shifted the ground beneath all of us. What they stole, what they hid, what they built on my name, none of it belonged to them anymore. The moment Grant's hand landed on my skin, he unlocked the very secret that would destroy them. I thought adulthood would save me once I finally left that house. I believed distance could silence the guilt they trained me to feel. But the moment I earned my first paycheck, the cycle began again. My mother called with a trembling voice, saying Chloe needed tuition money. Grant texted me hours later, claiming Mason's laptop had died unexpectedly. They said it was just help, just family, just temporary support. But temporary became routine, and routine became obligation. Every time I hesitated, they reminded me of everything they had sacrificed. They spoke of love like it was a bill I had forgotten to pay. They used worry as a leash and affection, as a bargaining chip. The guilt was familiar, almost comforting, like an old bruise you learn to ignore. I wired the money because arguing felt like betrayal. Then came the weekend trips they insisted would keep us close. Expensive cabins, beach rentals, birthday stays at resorts I never chose. They booked first and told me after, sending me totals like invoices. When I asked why I had to cover everything, they laughed softly. "You earn the most," they said, "and you know we'd do the same for you." I knew they wouldn't, but I didn't know how to say it out loud. Instead, I smiled through the exhaustion and sold more hours of my life at work. I told myself it was fine because I was strong enough to carry it. But strength becomes a trap when you only use it to lift others. For 3 years, I documented every transfer, every receipt, every frantic message. I wrote down dates, amounts, and the exact emotional weapons they used. I didn't think of it as proof. I thought of it as survival. Some nights I stared at the spreadsheet and felt my stomach twist. No one gives thousands of dollars out of love without being loved back. But I wasn't being loved. I was being drained. Still, I kept quiet because I feared the silence afterward. I feared what they would become without my money to stabilize them. I feared what I would become without something to fix. People think abuse is always loud, but mine was quiet and practiced. It was wrapped in thank yous and half-hearted hugs and long texts about loyalty. They convinced me that providing for them made me a good daughter. They convinced me that boundaries were selfish and independence was cruel. Every time I tried to pull away, they invented a crisis. A broken car. An emergency bill. A sudden medical scare that somehow needed only my credit card. And each crisis came with a reminder, we're all we've got. I didn't realize how deeply they'd programmed me until Connor asked a simple question. "Do they ever ask how you're doing?" he said. The answer lodged in my throat because the truth was embarrassing. No, they didn't. They never had. What they wanted wasn't connection. It was access. Access to my money, my time, my guilt, my silence. I didn't know it yet, but the spreadsheet I built in secret would soon become the match. The match that burned through every lie they ever fed me. Connor entered my life quietly, without grand gestures or dramatic sparks. He noticed things instead of demanding them. He listened instead of waiting for his turn to speak. The first time we talked, he asked about my work and actually cared about the answer. It startled me how gentle attention could feel when it wasn't tied to a price. He never pressed when I deflected questions about my family. He just said, You'll tell me when it feels safe. No one had ever given me safety as an option before. He had a calmness that made chaos shrink, even when I tried to hide mine. When he laughed, it felt like a room I wanted to stay in. I didn't plan to fall for him, but my defenses kept slipping. I found myself checking my phone, hoping his name would appear. He made space for me, without asking for anything in return. For the first time, I wasn't useful. I was simply seen. Weeks passed, then months, and he never tried to fix me or shape me. He just kept showing up in the most ordinary, life-altering ways. He cooked for me on nights I worked too late to feed myself. He walked me home when I felt overwhelmed by memories I pretended didn't hurt. He held my hand like it was permission to rest. One night, after a long shift, he found me staring at my spreadsheets. I minimized the screen too late, and he saw the columns of transactions. He didn't judge or jump to conclusions. He just asked, "What is all that?" My voice cracked as I explained the payments, the guilt, the pressure. He listened with his brows drawn, not in confusion, but in recognition. When I finished, he said something that shattered the story I'd told myself for years. "Lila, this isn't support. This is financial abuse." I felt the air leave my lungs because no one had ever named it. He didn't soften the truth to protect my feelings. He respected me enough to call it what it was. He pointed out patterns I had normalized. The emergencies that always aligned with my paydays. The affection that disappeared when I said no. The manipulation disguised as gratitude. "Love doesn't drain you," he said quietly. "It doesn't invoice you." The room spun because everything suddenly made sense. Every knot in my stomach. Every forced smile. Every time I couldn't breathe before sending money. Connor didn't push me to confront them. He offered to help me protect myself. He encouraged me to keep recording, keep documenting, keep observing. He said knowledge was armor and clarity was escape. Some people love you by wanting pieces of you. Connor loved me by giving me back pieces I thought I lost. The safety I felt around him slowly rewired my understanding of care. He proposed months later in the quiet of our apartment. No theatrics, just sincerity. I said yes, because loving him never felt like an obligation. It felt like breathing clean air after years of inhaling smoke. For the first time, I imagined a future where I wasn't carrying everyone else's weight. I didn't know it yet, but choosing him meant choosing myself. And that choice would unravel every secret my family fought to keep buried. The dinner started like any other, with forced smiles and polite chatter. Grant's hand brushed mine, and I flinched without thinking. I had rehearsed staying calm, staying quiet, staying invisible. But something in his eyes that night was different, restless, reckless. The argument started small, a comment about money I didn't give. It escalated fast. Before I knew it, his hand struck my face. The room froze. All eyes turned toward us. In that instant, fear and clarity collided. I realized this was my turning point. Connor was beside me in seconds, calm, steady. I pulled out the marriage certificate, my hand shaking but firm. Grant's laughter faltered as he read it. My parents' faces drained of color. I didn't speak. I let the paper do the talking. Connor called Dana, the forensic accountant, and asked her to review the trust. Within hours, the truth came into sharp focus. The original trust fund had been $450,000. Through years of investments, property appreciation, and rental income, it had grown to over $1.3 million. Grant had used it as collateral for loans, totaling $800,000. Every financial move they made was unauthorized. Every transaction, every loan, every diversion of funds illegal. They had never transferred the trust out of Samuel's name. The evidence was undeniable. I had been the legal owner the whole time. Connor and Dana mapped it out, every figure, every transaction, every violation. The spreadsheet I kept for 3 years became the blueprint of their fraud. Every signature, every bank record, every payment traced back to me. They had treated my inheritance like a personal ATM. But now the power shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the powerless daughter. I was the rightful owner. The room trembled as the implications sank in. Every lie they told, every demand they made, every manipulation. It all collapsed under the weight of truth. Grant stammered, trying to justify his actions. My mother tried to intervene, tears streaming, claiming misunderstanding. Dana outlined every breach and every law broken. Connor stood silent, steady, his hand on my shoulder. The numbers didn't lie. The documents didn't lie. I had more than just money now. I had leverage, clarity, and undeniable proof. The assets included 6 properties, rental incomes, and savings accounts. Everything Grant and my family used for their convenience belonged to me. 9 years of exploitation ended that night. The anger in me was tempered by relief. I realized they had relied on my silence. They had assumed I would never claim what was mine. But I had chosen myself. Every ounce of fear, every second of guilt, every sleepless night, all led to this moment. From the dinner table that night, nothing would ever be the same. I was no longer a bystander in my own life. I was in control. And control, I discovered, was sweeter than revenge. The day the authorities arrived, the house felt like a crime scene. Grant was handcuffed at the Phoenician Hotel, shocked and unprepared. Bank accounts were frozen immediately, cutting off all access to funds. My mother screamed, cried, and begged me to reverse everything. Chloe and Mason shouted, demanded explanations, and threatened consequences. I didn't respond. I documented every word, every call, every plea for my records. They had tried to control me for 24 years. Now they were exposed, powerless and furious. Family friends and distant relatives began calling, offering advice. Some were subtle, some outright manipulative. I kept meticulous notes, recording everything as evidence. I discovered I legally owned 6 properties outright. The sheer responsibility was overwhelming. Each property had tenants who had suffered under Grant's mismanagement. Security deposits withheld. Repairs ignored. Threats made. I realized I had to fix what they had broken. The first step was auditing every account, every lease, every maintenance record. I hired professionals to correct mistakes left behind for years. I personally contacted tenants to return withheld deposits. I arranged repairs on every property, restoring dignity and trust. For the first time, money felt like freedom, not a trap. The weight of inherited responsibility was heavy, but liberating. I understood the true cost of their deception. Not just the money, but the years they stole from me. Connor stood beside me, providing support, advice, and calm in the chaos. Together, we created a plan to manage the properties responsibly. We prioritized tenants who had been wronged first. We fixed financial errors that could have led to legal issues. We established oversight to prevent abuse in the future. Each action reminded me of my power, my rights, my self-worth. Even as family tried to manipulate me, I stayed firm. They threatened, they begged, they tried to bribe, but I remained resolute. Every tactic they used only strengthened my resolve. The law was on my side, and truth had my back. I started to envision a life where I wasn't merely surviving. I could rebuild, restore, and help others along the way. I established a fund to support tenants and the local community. I saw that wealth without integrity is meaningless. I claimed ownership of my life, my money, my future. The chaos around me was fading, replaced by clarity. I no longer feared confrontation or responsibility. I learned the depth of betrayal my family had enacted. But I also discovered the depth of my resilience. I realized I didn't have to hate them to protect myself. I didn't have to rage endlessly to reclaim my life. I had control now, and control was empowering. Every decision I made was mine, uncoerced, unmanipulated. For the first time in decades, I breathed without guilt. I had money, responsibility, and freedom. I had a clear path forward. And for the first time, I felt the true meaning of ownership. Not just of assets, but of my life, my choices, and my peace. My mother called me one morning, voice trembling and urgent. She claimed her chest hurt, and she needed me at the hospital immediately. I hesitated, memories of past manipulations flashing through my mind. Connor insisted I bring a lawyer and a witness. I agreed, cautiously, unwilling to fall for another trick. When we arrived, the hospital monitored her vitals carefully. The doctors quickly confirmed it was a panic episode, not a heart attack. Her act had been a ploy to guilt me into compliance. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and clarity all at once. I confronted her calmly, documenting every word. She cried, begged for forgiveness, and pleaded for my help. Her tears were heavy with rehearsed emotion, lacking true remorse. I reminded her of every time she had used fear to control me. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment she sold me to Grant. Her face twisted between desperation and defiance. She switched tactics, moving from pleading to threats and insults. She accused me of cruelty, of betraying the family, of being heartless. I listened, steady, refusing to be drawn into her drama. I told her the truth she had never wanted to hear. You sold me to Grant for your comfort and luxury. You made me a tool, not a daughter. She flinched, but said nothing in defense. I watched as her arguments crumbled under the weight of fact. I reminded her that I had spent years hiding, forgiving, and surviving. But the survival had ended. I would no longer participate in her manipulation. I refused to grant her control over my life again. I stood firm in my boundaries, clear and unwavering. She tried one last time, begging me to consider family loyalty. I shook my head. Loyalty is earned, not demanded. I told her I would no longer allow her guilt to dictate my choices. She had tried to teach me obedience through fear. I chose freedom instead. I reminded her that truth, law, and morality were now my allies. No act of deception would sway me again. Her words lost power because I had documented, verified, and prepared. Connor stayed by my side, silent, grounding me in reality. I saw the truth in the doctor's eyes, the lawyer's notes, the evidence I held. She had exhausted all her tactics. The final conversation was not about winning. It was about declaring my independence. I told her plainly that the 24 years of manipulation had ended. I left the hospital without hesitation, without regret. Every step away from her was a step toward reclaiming my life. I felt the weight of her control lift for the first time. Her attempts to provoke guilt were powerless. Her fear-mongering no longer held sway. I had chosen myself over her deception. The cycle of manipulation had been broken. I realized my freedom was not only financial, but emotional. I had drawn the line and walked beyond it. And in that act, I finally understood what it meant to be free. Grant was sentenced to prison, finally held accountable for his actions. My mother faced investigation for her role in enabling his schemes. Chloe and Mason, who had lived off my labor, had to find their own way. No more excuses, no more easy access to my resources. The extended family slowly retreated, powerless without my money. For the first time, I saw who truly valued me and who only wanted my wealth. I created a scholarship in my grandfather, Samuel's name, to honor integrity. It was my way of transforming what was stolen into something meaningful. I focused on rebuilding my personal life with Connor. Our marriage became a safe space where love was unconditional. We attended therapy together and separately, repairing hidden wounds. I took full control of the 6 properties left to me. Repairs were completed, tenants compensated, and management systems established. I refused to let anyone exploit what had been unfairly taken from me. I learned to separate family from bloodlines and those who actually cared. Money was no longer a burden, but a tool for empowerment and justice. I reclaimed my time, my voice, and my decisions. Every choice I made reflected my values, not their manipulation. I started mentoring young professionals, sharing lessons on self-respect. The anger I once carried became clarity and determination. I traveled, explored hobbies, and allowed myself genuine joy. Connor and I built a life free of coercion and false obligation. I maintained strict boundaries with my mother, Chloe and Mason. They could no longer dictate my feelings or actions. I invested in ventures that aligned with my principles and ethics. Financial freedom became a pathway to emotional and spiritual freedom. I celebrated small victories as much as big ones, each step meaningful. I wrote, reflected, and documented my journey to ensure I would not forget. Healing required facing uncomfortable truths without compromise. I learned that self-worth cannot be borrowed, bought, or coerced. The past no longer chained me because I confronted it fully. Every transaction, every lie, every manipulation was acknowledged and released. I discovered the strength in saying no and walking away. I found joy in giving generously to causes I chose freely. My home became a sanctuary, not a battlefield of expectation. I no longer feared confrontation. I welcomed accountability. Every decision reinforced that I was in control of my life. The 6 properties were more than assets. They were symbols of regained power. I balanced responsibility with compassion for those genuinely in need. Connor and I planned for the future, grounded in trust and mutual respect. My freedom was no longer abstract. It was lived, tangible, and daily. I had reclaimed my identity from decades of manipulation. Every step forward was a declaration. I am the author of my own story. The past no longer dictated my future. I was free, whole, and finally at peace with myself. I looked back on my family and felt no regret. They were never truly family to me. The years of manipulation had stolen enough, but they would steal no more. The only regret I carried was losing time before I recognized my own worth. I reclaimed every part of myself they had tried to suppress. The inheritance was mine, but more importantly, so was my future. I controlled my choices, my actions, and my story. I was no longer defined by fear or obligation. Every decision reflected my values, not their demands. I built a life rooted in honesty, integrity, and love. I nurtured relationships that lifted me rather than drained me. I honored my grandfather's legacy through a scholarship and acts of care. I invested in my own growth, healing, and happiness. The past no longer had the power to control me. I was free from guilt, manipulation, and coercion. I understood that true revenge is not destruction. It is refusing to let others destroy your life. I wrote the final chapter of my story on my own terms. The assets, the security, and the freedom were symbols, not trophies. The greatest victory was reclaiming my voice, my choices, and my peace. I was finally the author of my life, unbound and unstoppable.